What's up, motherfathers? Just wanted to jump on before the video and remind you that FyatLuxWorld.com is live, where you can get all the Fyat Lux merch that you desire, including this hoodie. Head on over to FyatLuxWorld.com now. Back to the video. I want a Star Wars movie where someone dies and they disappear into laundry. Why did that stop happening? What's up, motherfathers? It's just underwear, and today we're going to do something a little different. Today we're going to turn the Inside Out, YouTube channel into an Inside Out podcast. And if I were to have a podcast and not have my good friend TheJedion on as my first guest, well, then something must be wrong. So, without any further ado, let me introduce the very first guest to the Inside Out podcast, the TheJedion. TheJedion, welcome to the show, man. It's a show now.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, it's official. I mean, we're doing something new here. I'm excited to be your first guest. I think this is going to be really awesome.
Sweet. Yeah, so just a little backstory. I met you through my Web3 adventures after getting involved with the Fyat Lux NFT project. And we got together doing just like in Discord, and we did a few projects together, and we've become quite good friends, I think. And I've always known you as, for the most part, I've known you as TheJedion, and you've known me as Underwear. And that's kind of wild, isn't it? And we actually used to live really close to each other, but unfortunately we didn't get to cross paths. But what I wanted to start out with was TheJedion. Tell me about TheJedion and as like a persona and how you adopted it in this kind of Web3 space.
Kind of funny because I've been going by TheJedion or TheJedion for probably 20 plus years now. I kind of started back when World of Warcraft was about to come out. I was pretty big into Diablo 2, and one of my friends was like, hey, I'm going to move from Diablo 2 to World of Warcraft. You should move with me, go pick up the game, and it was actually releasing that day. So I hopped on my bicycle at the time and rode to the local video game store and picked up World of Warcraft on that opening night at midnight. And while I was riding home, I was like, okay, I know I want to play a dwarf. I love Lord of the Rings. I love dwarfs in Lord of the Rings, so I'm going to pick that. But I need a name, and I'm probably going to play this game so much because I played Diablo 2 so much. So I need a name that's going to stick with me potentially for the rest of my life. So I thought about it. I'm a big Star Wars fan, so I thought the word Jedi should go in there somewhere, because why not? But Jedi is not a good name, especially for a dwarf. So I thought, let's put an O-N at the end to make it Jedion. Well, Jedion never stuck. TheJedion kind of stuck, so that's been kind of my name ever since. And throughout all my adventures, over those last 20 plus years, I've just gone by TheJedion the whole time.
That's crazy. I didn't expect there to be so much meaning behind that. I knew TheJedion was I kind of got it over time that wasn't your real name. But as you can imagine, I didn't come up with Underwear with a lot of forethought, and I didn't really realize that it was going to take over and become kind of my personality. But yeah, you really had. So you set out to give yourself that moniker, and you really put in a lot of thought behind that. And Star Wars and sci-fi in general is big in the lore and your interest and stuff. I could see you got a few things in the background there.
Definitely. So I've always been kind of into the nerdy side of stuff. As a kid, I watched Star Wars probably 500 times for each of the original movies. Kind of watched it for half an hour before bed every night. So yeah, Star Wars was a huge part of my life. I've got 2 half-sleeve Star Wars tattoos, which you can't see because I'm wearing a hoodie, but I'll show them to you potentially another time. So yeah, it was a huge part of my life, and still is a huge part of life. It just kind of transforms from one universe to another.
It's so true. I have Star Wars tattoos as well, and I found Star Wars later in life. When I was a kid, Star Wars was not Star Trek. And my family was Star Trek. My cousins were Star Wars. And my parents pit us against each other. And I Star Trek is where it's at. And then later I like fell into the toys, and it became like, oh my god, this is like the story behind it is so incredible. And then I kind of got obsessed with it. Like I watched everything. Everything was so important. Every Christmas present, birthday present, every project was like, how can I turn this into Star Wars? And eventually I got the tattoo as like, let's put this away. Like it's the tattoo is actually of a little kid playing Darth Vader in a cardboard and duct tape TIE fighter. And I'm like, this is for kids. Let's put it there and put it in the past. But it's all of that is still there. I still have so much interest in sci-fi and just making new worlds. I think you know what I've watched more than the Star Wars movies themselves is the documentaries on how George Lucas made Star Wars. Have you seen that?
I've seen a few of them. I know this will date me a little bit, but I was always big on buying those special edition release DVDs where they had like 19 hours of behind the scenes footage and the editor's cut and the director's commentary and all that kind of stuff. And most movies, I didn't watch any of that. I was like, oh, that's just a bunch of boring garbage. But for Star Wars, I probably watched every minute on every DVD that was possibly available. So yeah, I've seen a lot of that stuff, and I think it's just really interesting because everyone thinks of like George Lucas as this mastermind behind Star Wars, but like the things he did in terms of say evolving sound in the movie space, like that was probably more important, or at least as important than Star Wars itself.
There's a lot in those documentaries of them in like old warehouses building the Death Star and stuff, and I get goosebumps thinking about it. Just doing the stuff that you and I do together with like NFTs and the 3D space that's going on right now. I feel like those guys and girls in those warehouses building models, they didn't necessarily know what they were doing in terms of the importance of it, unlike people would later get tattoos from it all. And I'm not saying that what we're doing is going to be etched onto someone's body one day, but just the fact that those things can carry through time, and the level of love and interest that you can put into something like that for the love of the game can carry on. And we're at a point where I look at stuff that was made back then and I think to myself, like, man, wouldn't it be cool if Indiana Jones 5 was made with only the equipment that they had when they made the third one? You know what I mean? And it felt like it was from that time. And I feel like with my computer and the level of stuff that we have right now, we can do that. Like we can make a movie that looks way better than that they made in the 70s. But I kind of want that. I want a Star Wars movie where someone dies and they disappear into laundry. Why did that stop happening?
No, it's very interesting perspective. So like I took a couple of things from what you said there, and one of them really resonated with me. It's that those guys were in a warehouse. They weren't rich, they didn't have like huge VC funding behind them. Like they probably had a small loan from a small film studio who just said, what the heck, let's give this a shot. And they were making do with what they had. And they were doing it truly because they loved it. They're like, I want to tell a story. I don't have a lot of resources. I want to just do this because I love it. And so many great things come from people who are just doing things that they love. I think, and maybe this is a little bit of my, West Coast nature. I think when money gets involved too much, the purity of the art starts going away. And I think you need to find those people who are doing things that they love for the sake of loving it over the people who are doing it to get paid.
Absolutely. I definitely have that like punk rock mentality inside me where I take it like, it's for free and stuff, but I've slowly gotten over that. But I think you're hitting on something that I've always thought about with Star Wars about, over time, George, at the beginning, he was put into a box. And he had to create outside of that box because he had constraints with money. He had constraints with the actors. He had constraints with the time. Everyone was like, oh my God, can you believe what we're shooting right now? Everyone thought it was a joke. They couldn't see it, right? And he was put into a box where he had to perform. And you look at those documentaries and you watch him during that time, and he was miserable, and he was put under so much pressure, and everything was no, 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 no. And that's what made the diamond, and that's what made that thing so special. And the more, I think, yes men that was put around him, the more that the constraints were gone, and the ability to make those diamonds was lost. Now it's all there, and like I have a new appreciation for, say, the prequels now, of it being, you know, what he said before, it rhymes. It's not the same, but it rhymes. And and it's still, Star Wars is still like one of my favorite properties, and it always will be. And even like the mistakes, or I wouldn't even call them mistakes, but the way that they took the new franchise, there's moments in those movies that still make me cry. You know, like, we could say what we want about the sequel trilogy, but having Ben and Han on the deck of the Death Star, and then it like flashing back to when he, like, that could have been the greatest thing ever, but it's surrounded by like kind of dog shit, to be honest.
It's kind of funny you say there was a moment there that I latched onto as well, as, you know, it made you cry. And I absolutely love film. It's like my favorite form of art ever. And Star Wars is obviously my favorite movie. So the movie that's made me cry the most out of all of the emotional dramas in the history of filmmaking is Star Wars Episode 7. Quite literally, I was in the theater there, and the last time I'd watched a movie was in the theaters of Star Wars was Episode 3. But those characters weren't really my childhood. They were kind of like new people, similar story. But I'm going to say the second that Episode 7 started, and you hear that brrr, I just started weeping. Yep. Like, I couldn't help myself. I had no idea what that movie was involved with. I'm a very anti-spoiler person, so I didn't watch a single trailer. I didn't read a single word about Star Wars Episode 7.
Wow.
I knew the release date. I got my pre-midnight ticket, whatever the first showing was, and I just sat in that theater, and I bet you I cried 50% of the time, just because I had that emotional connection. It was like seeing friends from your childhood that you haven't seen in 20 years. And it was just like so much joy. Looking back on the movie,
it hit me right in the chest, man. I remember seeing that, and that was when I was in my height. Like, I was obsessed. And I wept and I cried, and my wife was like, "You're a loser." Like, and I'm like, "You don't understand." but and I think that's where, like, I don't want to knock on Star Wars too much, but you said film was like a big thing for you. Film is like huge for me. I like talk in film lines, other than Star Wars, and like, don't say Indiana Jones, because that's probably up there as well. We're 80s kids, right? So we probably have a lot of the same things. But I always love to ask, I'm not going to say what your favorite movie is, but you have like a top 3, a top 5. Give me the universe of Jedion's movie reviews.
So I'm a pretty neurotic guy. So when it comes to like making lists or being like,
oh, you have this, don't you?
Favorite, everything. You could ask me my top 10 favorite anything you want, and I got the list prepared, because I'm like going through this in my head, and I'm like categorizing and ranking. And okay, so I'm going to say the top 10 is pretty consistent over time, but the order of the top 10 does change.
Fair enough.
So some of my favorite movies, Empire Strikes Back has probably been in the number 1 spot for a long time. I'm a big fan of Clockwork Orange. That Stanley Kubrick movie just blew my mind when I first saw it.
Shout out to Alts Anonymous.
Yeah, right? And I really liked Legends of the Fall. That was a movie that really hit me. I have a complicated relationship with my father, so that movie kind of touched on that really well with Anthony Hopkins and Brad Pitt. Some of my top 10 are a lot lighter, like Office Space. That movie resonated so loud with me that's become one of my all-time favorites. Happy Gilmore was one of my all-time favorites, or is one of my all-time favorites. 10 Things I Hate About You.
No way.
Heath Ledger, Julia Stiles. Yeah, it was just that it hit that time, right? It was that mid to late 90s exactly. I don't remember, but I was that teenager watching teenagers on TV, and I felt like, the Heath Ledger character, and I just loved it. I've seen that movie way more times than I probably should admit, but I'll say this is maybe inappropriate, but I used that movie as a first movie over with a new girl so many times. I was like, why don't we put on 10 Things I Hate About You? And women would love it. And the fact that I loved it, it was definitely a good approach. I'll say that.
I got to admit, A Knight's Tale. A Knight's Tale. That movie to me was like a guilty pleasure growing up, and then like I found out that my friends actually dug it too, and then we all were like, wait, why do we just kind of became obsessed with it at high school, and we kept shouting it from the rooftops as like, this is the G'est movie ever. And A Knight's Tale, everyone should go watch that movie.
Yeah, Heath Ledger, right?
He's the best, man. I haven't seen a bad performance that guy is in. Do you remember when he was like announced as Batman? Did you get like a stick up your butt too?
Joker, you mean? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Joker.
I was definitely concerned. Like, I was like, the guy from 10 Things I Hate About You / Knight's Tale, like, ooh, that's not going to go well. But I'm always open-minded. Like, a lot of actors are really typecast into a character that they've played in the past. And when they're given an opportunity to break out of that, I approach it with curiosity more than skepticism, because I'm hopeful that the actor is just now given an opportunity to expand his role.
And he knocked that out of the park. Did you obsess with that movie like I did?
I really like that movie for sure, but I really like it because of the performance of Heath Ledger.
Right.
I think I'm kind of over superhero movies. Like, you can see a bunch of comics in my background. Like, I love this superhero story, but I think the movies have been a bit overdone at this point.
Yeah.
Back when Dark Knight came out, though, it was still fairly fresh. And yeah, I did very, very much like it. But in hindsight, I'm only watching that movie for Heath Ledger's performance.
100%. And I think that franchise did a few things that like sucked me in, that really set up that middle movie to be what it was. That first one was like you said, like right now, video or superhero movies are really played out. And I think what this industry has forgot is that like it's not the superhero movie we care about. It's Batman, it's Superman, it's Spider-Man. And when you make those 5-6 movies, you can't dig deeper, right? But anyway, but what that movie did in the first movie that I thought was so interesting was half the movie wasn't Batman. And it might as well have been a revenge story for someone else. And then halfway through, it turns into, so it was a very true, plausible upbringing of why this guy, and like the mechanics of how his neck didn't bend right and he didn't like it. This feeds into like the past lore of Batman and like Michael Keaton not being able to move his neck and things. And then that movie came out with Heath Ledger, and I bet they did that on purpose. They knew Heath Ledger's a beast. Yeah, they knew it was gonna. This is the gay cowboy. Right? That wasn't like after. It was, I think it was the next movie even. And so people got like upset, and man, I don't know if you remember the campaign that they had around that movie when it came out, but they had like viral before it was viral, where they were emailing or mailing people cakes with phones inside of it. They were going to Comic-Con, and instead of doing a presentation, they leaked $10,000 of money into the vendors with Joker faces painted on them. They did all this kind of like what you would call today as guerrilla marketing that then was just like blowing people's minds. So when that movie dropped, and then the performance behind it was what it was, and then what happened, it was like it led to like one of the greatest performances ever. And you don't get that performance that I don't want to call it the perfect storm, but that like nexus of things happening, taking one of those things away.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think it really highlights something that we've talked about a bit before, and it's that every artist is trying to make that connection with, I'll say, a person in the audience. So that guerrilla marketing campaign, what that's doing is that's creating like that unique experience that person says, yes, like I'm in, I want to be part of that. And that's something that they might tell the story of for the rest of their lives. And it's certainly creating that immortal bond with that piece of art or that franchise forever. And I really believe that fandom, or I'll say following, or even community, is built kind of one event at a time. You don't really make something for everybody. You make each thing for one person in particular, so they have that one emotional connection with it. And then you've got them. You've got them forever once someone
So
has that
true.
emotional connection. And I think that's like a good way to put what we're trying to do in Web3 here. Is we're trying to find those single moments, giving people our time, teaching them something, creating a piece of art that resonates with them. We're trying to create those Web3 intimate connections so we have those relationships for life. And I think a lot of people always say, for every project that's out there, go market it. Like, go spend some money on marketing, go get some new people in our community. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily know how to do that. And everyone has probably a different strategy. But the strategy I think is most meaningful is trying to make that one connection with that one person that lasts forever. And that's the approach I'm trying to take in everything I do. Is I think the biggest way to get someone to be on your side is by giving them time, being vulnerable with them, and making something special.
Well said, and kind of a perfect segue into what we're doing now. But before we get into that, can we just back up just a hot second? So we're all
Sure.
fandom, right? We all love sci-fi and everything. You've got the moniker Jedion. The meaning is there. It's steeped in meaning. Where do you find Web3? How do you tiptoe into that, and when does that tip over into something that you realize that it could be something as big as that fandom, say with the Dark Knight?
Well, it's quite a. I guess it's all kind of connected. So when I was playing World of Warcraft, I was a very competitive player. I kind of have this tendency to latch on to something and then do it with every ounce of energy I have for as long as I possibly can. So I did that with World of Warcraft, and I became a very competitive, high-level player. Probably if you look hard enough for Jedion, you're going to find some old World of Warcraft videos of me on the internet from probably 20 years ago.
Now I
But
will.
yeah, go for it. Go Google Jedion. And it kind of tells you a little bit about why I've stuck with the name, because I've been building the name Jedion for a long time. Like, I built it as a high level World of Warcraft player. When I left that world, I started playing the World of Warcraft trading card game, and I became a very competitive player on that, traveling around to all the tournaments and doing fairly well. I won't say top of the world or anything, but I was one of the top players in North America for sure. And I continued to use the name Jedion in that world. And all of my friends got to know me as Jedion because the name followed me from World of Warcraft into the card game. Then, when I stopped playing the card game, I started playing Hearthstone, which is essentially another World of Warcraft card game. And naturally, I chose the name Jedion for that. Started playing Hearthstone under the name Jedion, tried to play that competitively, but my whole life I feel like I've always been doing things like 5 years too early. Like, when I was playing World of Warcraft competitively, there was no Twitch. There wasn't really a large esports scene outside of StarCraft. So when I was world class at that, no one cared. Like, there was no way to showcase that. And I move on to the card game, and I was playing cards highly competitively before, other than Magic and a bit of Yu-Gi-Oh, a bit of Pokemon. Like, there wasn't a huge competitive scene for that. And then I moved on to Hearthstone, and when I was good at that, streaming was just starting to come out, but I felt like I'd passed my prime in terms of like competitive gaming. So if I would have just been 5 years later on everything, maybe I'd be a professional gamer or a streamer or something else. But coming back to it, one of the streamers who I started watching in Hearthstone, he got interested in Web3. Probably, I want to say what year would that be? Mid 2021. And he was very much into a lot of Solana projects, and he had a few on Ethereum that he was really interested in. And he always knew me as Jedion because I played Hearthstone with him, I started watching him, and we had a connection. So when he started bringing me into Web3 and getting me more and more interested in it, it was just another natural progression of my name from World of Warcraft, my name from Hearthstone, my name from the trading card game is now my Web3 name. And that brand has kind of continued to follow me, or maybe I've taken it with me on the whole journey.
I think, yeah, it's so awesome that you kind of it goes deep back into your history before Web3. I kind of
Mm-hmm.
have this philosophy of, I think a lot of what we're doing right now when we talk about the metaverse and Web3 is, I think we're stepping over the metaverse in order to kind of invent a siloed version of the metaverse. I think we'll look back in history and really see the big bang of the metaverse as the internet. And eventually the like opaqueness will dissipate and we'll be able to see that we're in the metaverse now, but our like personalities are splintered. There's a little bit on Twitter, there's a little bit over here. There's these spaces that are emerging, there's these conversations that are happening and these personas that are coming up and stuff, but they're all kind of like quarks at the beginning of the universe. They're sparking in and out of existence. They're not solid yet, and that eventually will happen. But and it's interesting to watch everybody step into at different points and how much meaning, little meaning, more meaning that they all bring to it. And I love that you had all of this before you, this momentum coming into it, because as I've said before, I didn't put much thought into underwear. Now, I think I lucked out and made the best of it. But, I've talked to a few people that they're just like, yeah, I wish I put a lot more thought into it because now my mom calls me this and it's, turd burglar or something, right?
Well, I'm glad I'm not turd burglar as well. But I think I really liked what you said there about how the internet itself is kind of its metaverse. And what I think about there is, I think the metaverse, or the concept of the metaverse, is alluring because it's a way to be who you are. Yeah, I'm going to use your own words, so you're going to laugh at this. It's going to be a way to bring your inside out. The person who you want to be, you get to be that person on the internet. You get to be that person in a metaverse space. So you get to choose your name as an example. Maybe your family name doesn't make sense. Maybe you've never really felt connected to your family like that. I can speak personally about that. When you look at my Twitter handle, it says TheJedion. It doesn't have my last name. It's not because I don't want to dox and tell people my last name. It's because that last name doesn't have a connection for me. I've used the last name Jedion as a chosen last name for over 20 years, like more than half my life now. So it's a way for me to be me in a way that I choose, not in the way that I was, let's say, naturally born or forced to be. And that extends to the avatar you choose, the relationships you make. You don't have to be friends with the people who are in your neighborhood by force. You can be friends with anyone in the world that you like. You can find your communities better. If you're living in, say, a small town, maybe you can't find the fellow punk rockers, so to speak, but you can find those people online. And I really believe that no matter how unique we all are, we certainly have a lot more people in the world who are pretty much just the same as us. The only difficult part is just finding them. The internet or metaverse spaces or really just kind of any network allows you to find your people and have belonging.
And one of those biggest...
I feel so alone.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's like a community, right?
Yeah.
Like finding that, like, one of the biggest hubs that I have found was Fyat Lux. And before, I had, and maybe we'll get into this with your story, but when I got into NFTs, I certainly came into it with kind of kicking and screaming a little bit. I didn't get it. And someone who had a clone who saw what I did with like fashion and making like 3D clothes was like, you have to do this. This is what you're doing. Why aren't you doing this? And they kept pushing me and pushing me and pushing me. And I finally minted, I think it was like 2020, like January 2020. I was trying to get it 2019 and I just missed it. But I came back into 2020 roaring. But I had like kind of a hustler's mindset. I wanted to make money. I wanted to flip what I did into this new creator economy. And it was really kind of soul, not crushing, but it was just like there wasn't, you know, the story he told me of you just mint it and it sells wasn't true, right? Not that it ever was for just everyone, but you know, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. And then it was kind of crickets. I met a few people right off the bat. Alts Anonymous was one of them that, like, the first day I joined Twitter, he just, like, I don't know how he found me, but he's just like, hey, you're cool. Here's a job. Here's this. And I was like, oh, man, this is the creator economy. It's this easy. But I quickly realized that not everyone is as awesome as Alts Anonymous. But that clone eventually said to me, hey, there's this project called Fyat Lux, and they give you files that I think you would be interested in. And that opened up the wormhole. And I got in with kind of a hustler's mindset of, oh, I can make a lot of content with this. But very quickly I found people like you and people like Razor and people like Jumari that I was like, oh my God, like there's this community of like-minded people that get it. That I don't have to explain that it's not a JPEG, that I don't have to do all this stuff, and can explain to me that it's not just a JPEG, and the stories that they write and the things that we could do together. So that's where we met, and we started with a few projects and stuff. But how did you find Fyat Lux? What brought you to that? Was it that same kind of buzzing of the hive of the community?
Not at all, actually. It was. I'm very much like most people in Web3 in the fact that I started my journey just trying to make money. So I was watching the streamer that I mentioned before. He kept talking about, "Hey, I'm making money on this. I'm making money on that," and I'm like, "Well, I like making money." And it was still the pandemic at that point, and didn't have much else to do. So I was already kind of interested in crypto, so it wasn't like a big stretch for me to move from crypto into NFTs. But it was probably bought my first NFT maybe October, November of 2021, and there was a couple flops along the way. But my first 2 or 3 projects, I mean, that was the height of the bull market, so it was pretty hard to miss. But I just made a ton of Ethereum on a few projects very early in my NFT journey. So I was like, heck yes, like this is awesome. I love making this. So I kept trying to find new opportunities. So I was watching for all like the hot mints or the trending projects. And I remember pretty clearly, it was just after Christmas, just before New Year's. I was laying in bed, just woke up looking at the charts, and I saw this project that was minting really quickly. It's called Fyat Lux. Never heard of it, didn't have it on my radar, wasn't part of that Discord. I went to their website really quickly. They weren't quite minted out yet. And I saw all the things they were doing with the 3D files, the really cool kind of, I call it like 80s comic book kind of art with like flashy colors and thick black outlines. And I was like, man, this looks really good. Like this looks better than anything else I'd seen up to that point. And they were going for like a price I could afford, which is a key thing. It wasn't like a Bored Ape where I have to mortgage my house in order to buy it, right? I was like, this is a project that speaks to me. So I bought it, and the entire intent was to buy some to flip and make money. But I didn't buy just any project to try to flip and make money. My mindset was always like, if I get stuck with this, am I going to be mad at myself? Because earlier in my NFT journey, I bought some things to try to flip. I got stuck with them, and I hated them. So at least with Fyat Lux, if I wasn't able to flip them to make money, at least I got something cool, and I won't be too upset about it. And honestly, I probably, waited a week or so, saw the reveal, liked them even more, and I was like, oh yeah, this is going to go to the moon. So I invested even more into Fyat Lux, trying to, I'll say, catch the fire before it got too hot. And I became pretty heavily invested in Fyat Lux. And I have a finance background. I've worked in finance most of my life. And I had the same mindset that I think a lot of people have is, all right, time to sit back now. I put my money in. Let's see what this team can do. Let's see what this company gives me. And you just kind of sit back and wait for your dividends like you would a stock. And the dividends didn't come. And frankly, the dividends don't come from many projects. There's maybe 1% or less of projects that actually yield positive returns for a holder. So I was like, well, I just came off of having a few successes. I would say they were probably luck-based. And suddenly this project that was doing all of these amazing things wasn't making me money. And it didn't make sense to me. It didn't compute. So I took a bit of a step back and I said, okay, what am I doing here? If I'm trying to buy a thing to make money off of, and I'm expecting the company or the team to do everything for me, isn't this just a stock? Like, am I just treating this like a stock? And I said, this is a little different than a stock. That's why it's not like this registered security. It's kind of like a little bit of like a comic book, a little bit like a stock, and a little bit of this new thing. And I was like, okay, what's this new thing? What makes this special? And the thing I kind of realized is this is one of the first things in the world where you can actually directly influence the value of your own asset. So if you were, say, an owner of, issue 1 of a major comic book series, you can't do a lot to increase its value. Like maybe you go to a convention and you wear a cool costume. Maybe you tell your friends that it's a great story, but like your span of influence is pretty limited. You can make some fan fiction, not a whole lot of things. If you own a stock, you have absolutely no control. Unless you're a huge shareholder who can control like the board of the directors or the executive committee, you basically have no say over how that company is run. But with Web3, you can actually add value yourself that helps rise the water so all ships get higher. And I realized that probably 3 to 4 months into my ownership of Fyat Lux. And that's probably when we started making a connection. As I said, I can start creating content with these assets and help people realize how cool the things are that I bought trying to make money off of. And the thought was, if I can show other people how great these things are, it'll help not only myself, but it'll help all the other people in the community who are holders. It's not a sit back and wait and watch what happens. It's go create the future that you want.
It really puts kind of the throttle and the steering wheel in your hand, and at least for the assets that you have, and the ability to like imbue the lore and the meaning behind those characters and those things. Just the other day was I'm a DJ and had a whole Twitter space where they dedicated a big part of it to talking about the hunt that one of the voids had for all of the voids inside of a painting that was made. The painting was of the famous poker game of the dogs playing poker, but it had all been replaced with voids. And one of the void holders went on a crusade to get all of the voids in the painting, and the level of meaning that all of those voids received from being placed into that painting is a really good example, I think, of what you're talking about, of the ability to kind of make stories, make content, make adopt personality even, whatever you want. and all of these things kind of feed into the lore, and if you're lucky enough, they could actually bleed into actual canon. And if you're lucky enough, they could become their own characters and things. So it's fascinating to see it go. Did you have any idea when you first started writing for Fyat Lux that maybe some of those things would become? Was it were you taking a moonshot, or did you firmly believe that this is what Web3 is about, so it will work?
It was definitely a bit of me playing and seeing how it would work. And like, we'll relate this to Star Wars. If I'm a big Star Wars fan and I do all the coolest things in the world and write all the stories, unless my name's Timothy Zahn, no one gives a shit about my story. Just like straight up, like there's a million authors who've made fan fiction of Star Wars and no one gives a shit. But with Web3, I was in the same space, the same channels as the person who could make a difference. They could take my story and make it part of the universe. And as a holder, I get that influence. So it's kind of the equivalent of like me picking up the phone, calling up George and say, yo, George, so I own Chewbacca and I don't want him to die. So that whole throw a moon on him and smash him, yeah, that's not going to happen. I want Chewbacca to outlive on. So let's make that happen. And George goes, all right, like, I think we can make that work. Do you have any other ideas for the character? And you get to work with I'll say the people who can make things canon to tell your part of the story, like your character in the world. And the closest thing that felt to me was kind of like playing a big game of Dungeons and Dragons. I said I was nerdy. I did a lot of Dungeons and Dragons when I was younger. And the idea is you have this team or you have this dungeon master who are creating a world. They can define the basic rules of that world. Like, people can't fly. It's kind of Earth-like. Maybe you're in a desert. There's some old technology around. There's no magic. There's no dragons. There's nothing like that. And you got some special powers that we're kind of figuring out exact details of. And you're like, okay, like, I can kind of do that. But now the character, the people who live in that world, that's on the individual, that's on the holder, that's on the player in order to develop and tell their story within the greater world. And as you have different people or different holders or different players interacting with each other, you start doing this group storytelling thing. And it's a super powerful mechanic that's worked so well in game playing that now we're using in, I'll say, a more official lore world building kind of mission. And I think it's like this kind of fun thing that allows us to participate in something greater than just our individual selves.
Yeah, it's really like the founders of these projects really have to kind of let go, and they really have to, it's more like a mold growing than, someone painting a picture. And over time I've gotten into other projects and I've done other things, and there's this other layer happening. There's like the lore of the project, the canon from the individual worlds. There's this metaverse layer of us here as Jedion and Underwear. And then there's the IRL of us actually at the computer. I look at my other camera and it's not Underwear. And there's these three layers to it. And the layer of the metaverse that is all of these like 3D projects, the like Avatar or the Avengers work. I don't know what we're calling. We really need a nickname for all of these like 7 to 10 like of us. But like this group that's forming, it's like, I feel like I'm walking around the high school gym again. And like everybody's like feeling each other out, like, okay, what are you about? What are you about? Oh, this guy's cool. This guy's cool. And to be honest, I haven't met like the jock or the person that's like mean or what. That's not true. I actually have seen some projects that kind of suck, but none of them have like come over to my lunch table yet. And it's I feel like I'm back at the skate park again, and we're all cheering each other on. And you're trying to do the heel flip, and you're trying to do a corkscrew. So we're all on different levels, but we're all like cheering each other on. And it's like I get goosebumps thinking about it.
What you said just resonated with me so loud is when you're in the confines of a high school, right? You're saying your whole world is these kind of 500 people, whatever it is. And you have all these little cliques of 10 to 15 people. Within the confines of those 500 people, you have your friend groups and you have your enemy groups. And you kind of create this little world of that's everything. Those are my allies and those are my enemies. And then as soon as you graduate, or maybe a couple years after you graduate, you step into a bigger world, more people, more things. And suddenly, every one of those 500 people are now your friends. It doesn't really matter how they were in high school. What you have in common with them now is we all had that same high school experience. So as you zoom out, and you get to bigger pictures, you realize that the people who are sitting beside you are more your allies than you ever thought. Like, think of sports as another example. If you cheer for your local sports team, suddenly now you're on a community of 50,000 people who are all cheering for the same thing. If you took those 50,000 people and put them in another scenario, they'd find a way to subdivide. But when you have them versus 26 other teams in the league, they're all united. And I think of that very much like the metaverse space. Within our Fyat Lux project, we have friend groups. You and I are one group. There's other groups out there. And then you look at us as a whole project. We're all united under the banner of our favorite project. And you look at other projects doing similar things or different things, and you're like, my project's the best. And then you zoom out a little bit and you say, what about all the people who are doing metaverse avatars? Well, suddenly now we're all friends. It doesn't matter if you're doing your project a little different than we're doing ours. We're part of the same sports team now. Then you zoom out even further and you're like, we're all part of Web3. It's not a huge community, Web3. People think it's really big, but there's probably 10, maybe 20,000 actual unique people in the space. That's like a sports team. There are 50 other sports teams or hundreds of other sports teams in the world of groups of people who are all interested in the same thing. And when it comes down to it, Web3 people defend Web3 people, even though when you zoom back in, they all have their little communities and their little cliques. And I think that's really what I'm trying to do in my actions, is kind of help people realize, like, if we zoom in enough, yeah, we can find differences. But if we choose to zoom out, we can find reasons to be friends, reasons to connect, and reasons to support each other as much as we possibly can.
Well said. Hear, hear. There's a reason you're the B team leader. Damn. And I say that with love. For people that don't understand, there's a scene from one of my favorite movies called The Life Aquatic, where someone says that, hey, why am I always on the B team? And Steve says to him, you might be on the B team, but you're the B team leader. And JediOn, as our community wanders right now, you have certainly stepped up and put on that hat, and we all really, really, really appreciate it. I can't tell you how much we value you jumping in the DMs when people will get FUD, when you're promoting other things, when you're representing us, when you're converting sparks and stuff like that. And, I certainly am here because you're here. And I want to help you and this project however I can. And I get FUD so much. And, 2 sentences from TheJedion, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's probably not so bad. And I too, I think, have been that back to you from time to time, and together we've really become good friends. So I really thank you for being on the first episode of the Inside Out podcast. So just to close out, is there anything? Do we want to talk about anything with Fyat Lux? Do we want to spill any beans? Get anything out there? Is there anything you want to say before we wrap it up?
I mean, there's probably a dozen things I could shill about our community, but I think, to put it simply, come by, come say hi to me. Like, I will seriously give anyone some of my time. That's the best gift I think any human being can give to another human being, is a little bit of their time. A lot of projects won't do that for you. People are cliquey, or people are sheltered, or they don't make time, or they can't make time. I'll give you time. You wanna connect with me, you wanna debate with me, you want to find a community that will accept you, we're here. We're doing all kinds of awesome things, but most importantly, we're trying to make human connections with other humans. And we're a place where you belong. Even if you don't belong in any other Web3 place, this is a cool community that we've developed. And we might be a small community, but we really care for each other. And it's really, you kind of said it well, Underwear. You and I have supported each other a lot over the last year and made actually a very meaningful connection. And I want to continue to make meaningful connections with other people who share this common interest with me.
Well, there's a lot of action on the floor right now. Hopefully we'll get a few more people into the Discord. If you're new to the Fyat Lux community, welcome. We are happy to have you. Hopefully there'll be a lot more in there soon, and we can make a lot more of these connections. I can have a lot more of these conversations. JediOn, I think that was pretty good. I think we killed it, man. I really enjoyed talking to you. Let's turn the camera off and have another hour-long conversation. To everyone out there, follow Chris at TheJedion. You could follow me at Underwear NFT. And obviously check out Fyat Lux, Voids, Volts, all of the people inside of the 3D avatar community. And remember, wear your inside out. See you guys.
Bye, everybody.